I'm going to share my biggest regret that I had last year, and that is not putting this in my shop sooner. Now, I'm going to get into the specifics on why I feel that way, but the real purpose of this video is to answer all of the questions that I've been getting since putting this into the shop, because it is a pretty significant change to go from a standard cabinet saw to a slider, specifically here in the United States. Now, why was last year the reason why I decided to put one of these in the shop? I'll be quite honest with you. I've had a lot of people over the years ask me, have you ever considered a slider? They started asking me that question a lot when I got the A341 jointer planer combo, which is also a hammer machine. And I think because I put that machine in my shop, people were like, okay, well, have you thought about any of the other stuff? My immediate reaction was, no, absolutely not. I don't have the space to do that. I'm in a 3-car garage. And I think that that's probably the reaction that most people have when they think about a sliding table saw. They're like, man, that thing takes up so much space. Well, that's the first thing that I want to go over. So the issue that I find with sliding table saws like this here is that you can't just go to a store and take a look and get your hands on it. Now, there are places that will stock some of these items, but very, very few. So it does make it a little bit more challenging. What you kind of almost have to do is go to the company's headquarters, where most of these companies probably have a bunch of their stuff set up so people can come in and take a look at it. And that's exactly what I did. I actually flew to Delaware, which is where Felder USA's headquarters is, and I got my hands on one in person, this exact same sliding table saw. Matter of fact, I was able to test out the Felder version. I was able to test out the Kappa series sliding table saws, and I was just really impressed. And when I saw it in person, immediately my mind changed. So the first thing I'm going to say is it's really hard to get a judge of the scale of something by watching the video. The first thing that everybody always says to me when they come in my shop is, wow, it looks a lot bigger on the TV or when I'm watching your videos. And I have a 20 by 30 garage. It's a 3-car garage, 20 feet in depth, 30 feet in width. And for me, I have it moved over against the wall. And I want to talk about that for a minute because that's not how I had my previous table saw set up. I did have to make some modifications to my space in order to effectively use this, and what it resulted in is actually a better layout and more space because I switched to this. This saw forced me to get out of my own head on the way that I had always been laying things out. So what ended up happening when I went to Felder, I had a great meeting. When we got done, I actually went back to the hotel room that night, pulled out my computer, and immediately started rearranging my shop in SketchUp, trying to figure out what the best layout was going to be. And I had to make 1 or 2 sacrifices that I really liked with the previous layout. But at the end of the day, this was the solution, and it gave me all of this wonderful space right in the center of my shop as not only a walkway, but a staging area and everything else. What I want to do in this part of the video is kind of give you an idea of just how far away from the wall this is sitting with the outrigger table on it. And I bring that up because I get asked all the time, like, is it easy to take the outrigger table off? The answer is yes, it's very simple. And I actually have myself showing installing it and removing it in the assembly video that I did on this. I have not taken it off, and I don't intend to take it off since I have put the saw in here because of what this machine has done for the way that I work. The first measurement that I'm going to give you is from the wall to the end of the outrigger table. Now, I do want to highlight that I don't know if you can see it in the video, but on this side, I do have my dust collection pipe that still runs, so I do have to keep it off of the wall. That's probably going to change just because I'm not getting full capacity with where it is right now. And speaking of that, my rip capacity, so from the fence to the blade, my rip capacity, I have the 31-inch model. They also make a 48-inch model, which is actually what this was when they sent it, but I ended up cutting down the bar because I knew I wanted the 31-inch, and I haven't come across a situation yet where I was like, man, if only I had the 48, I could do this. So the distance that I have from the edge of the table to the wall, like that dead space basically, is 9 inches. So just to give you an idea, it does sit 9 inches off of the wall. But I'm going to include that number in this measurement. The best way to do this is to go right here, and we're at 91.5 inches. 91.5 inches all the way to the end of this. So that's the width across. The first thing that I'm gonna say is my previous table saw was a SawStop 3 horsepower, the 36-inch rip, and I did have the Incra fence on it. The space that that table saw required, if I wanted to use the full capacity, the full rip capacity on the SawStop, was the same as this. Because on the Incra fence, that bar sticks all the way out, so you have to have the space available for that. And I want to come back to that point. You have to have the space available there for it anyways. That's very important when you're talking about a sliding table saw and the space that it takes up. And this was the aha moment for me. Now let's move on to the slider. I have the 79-inch slider. I didn't plan on getting the 79-inch. I actually planned on getting, I believe it was the 48-inch. I'm like, oh, I don't need that big a crosscut capacity. Then I started thinking about it, and I'm like, well, okay, how much am I really adding by going to the 79-inch, and what capacity does that allow me, right? And what this saw is best for and created really for is 5x5 sheet goods. So if you work with Baltic birch a lot, this is a perfect saw. And guess what? I love working with 5x5 Baltic birch. And I know a lot of people might say, well, yeah, good luck finding it. Well, in my area, getting 5x5 sheets of Baltic birch is absolutely no problem, and it never has been. So I made that decision to switch to the 79. As you can imagine, if I was to measure this, it is 79 inches. It's just shy of 79 inches. Now that doesn't mean that my full capacity is 79, because where I have the fence right now, I've got about 70.5. So more than enough to handle a full sheet, 5x5 sheet of Baltic birch or whatever sheet goods that you can get in 5x5. Now what I want to do is I want to put this in the locked position so I can give you an idea of the footprint that it takes up front and back. So there, we're locked. This now doesn't move, and you know, this is the space that it takes up. The depth of the table saw, just the cast iron, the top is, well, let's go with the bar for the fence, 41 inches. Now I'm not really going to measure with the outfeed support. One thing that's really good about hammer machines or Felder machines or any of their machines, quite frankly, is whatever their support system is, it works on all the tools, right? So like I actually have 2 of these additional supports mounted with the same bracket on the table saw that I do on my joiner planer combo, that I do on the bandsaw. I'm not going to include that additional support in here because it's all within where the slider actually is. But what I will say is that from the outfeed side of the blade, we're looking at roughly through the end of the cut, we're looking at about 35 inches before it drops off. So still pretty good support. Sometimes I have to put some additional support out there, which they do offer. They do offer a extended leg that does give you more support, and where that would come into play is if you're cutting an 8-foot long piece that's narrow, it'll just stop it from tipping and falling off the saw. Now I do want to give a measurement of what this would be if you didn't have the outrigger table installed on it, which again is very simple to take off. 53 inches. That's including the 9 inches that I have it sticking off of the wall. So 53 inches from the wall. That's how much space this saw takes up. That is a very small footprint. That is a smaller footprint than my previous table saw. I'm telling you, you see this stuff and it's like, it's hard to believe until you actually go and see it in person. So with that being said, I wanted to flip you around to this angle because what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna retract the slider all the way back to where it needs to go. Now, mind you, if I moved this forward, which is very simple to do, let's just loosen these 2 knobs here, I can move the fence forward. So before I told you about the capacity that I had, that was just because that's where I had it in place. If I wanted to, I could put it all the way down here, or I could put it down here. It's very simple to change, and it doesn't change the accuracy at all. So now I've got it set. I can bring this all the way back, and I wanted to show you this angle for 2 reasons. Earlier I mentioned the space that you need around a table saw is what usually ties people up and makes them go, I can't do that. Like I don't have the space for it. Because visually, looking at it, visually, yes, it takes up a bigger footprint. But it's no different from a standard table saw. And that's why I wanted to show you this angle. What you'll see behind me is all of my offcuts and where I store all of my plywood, right? So I can go from this location here, this 5x5 sheet, up onto my slider, make my cuts, take the stuff over to the assembly table, right? Makes sense. But it doesn't change the fact that if this was a standard table saw, I still need that space behind it. The only difference is there's not anything visually there for you to see. And that's when I was really like, okay, this doesn't take up as much space as people think. It's just that now, like when this is in a locked position, you might come into someone's shop and go, man, look how much space your table saw takes. It takes exactly the same amount of space as a traditional cabinet saw. The difference is you see this, right? You're not, if I'm just looking at the space needed around a table saw to make my cuts, I'm not thinking about, you know, what space it's taking up. But what I would tell you is that even if this was a traditional table saw, I wouldn't put a drill press right here. I wouldn't put a bandsaw right here. No, I would put nothing back here because I need this space to go through. And the same thing applies to the outfeed side where the camera is currently located. So with that being said, I want to pull this all the way back and give you an idea of, let's just go from where the fence is. From where the fence is back, it's 71 inches, so just shy of 6 feet. And it's going to be very similar on the outfeed side. So with that being said, what does that tell you? If you're going to do this and you're going to get a sliding table saw, which I'm telling you right now, if you want to sacrifice that space in your shop, 100% get it. And by the end of this video, you'll know why I'm so excited about it. Keeping that in mind, you need to have at least 6 feet prior and at least 6 feet on the exterior portion. But just like any other table saw, you really need 8. Actually, you really need 9. So let's look at that. Let's see how much space I have. Now this is well before the blade, but I will still see if I have. So I have over 8 feet just to get to my material. If I slide this forward to where the cut would start, I'm at 9.5 feet. So all it takes is a little bit of planning and figuring out where you would put this. But this doesn't, just because this is a slider, it doesn't change anything. If it was a regular table saw, I would absolutely have to have that space. Now I do have it against the wall, and before I said that I did have to make some sacrifices, one of the things that I did do was remove the joiner planer combo from the end of my table saw, which I really loved in the previous setup that I had. But now I've moved it here, so I actually ended up turning this completely. So I'm pushing boards through this way on the jointer, running them through this way on the planer. That was a sacrifice for me because I did really like having this machine in this orientation, because I could go through this way and back this way and just turn, and my assembly table is right there. So I have had to make some modifications and adjustments based on that, but it still works great, and I actually have more in-feed and out-feed support, and it's actually easier to adjust in the location that it is now. And then I was able to take advantage of this location to, you know, continue using my bandsaw over here. What that resulted in was a huge walkway in the middle of my shop. So when I'm taking materials, like all the lumber that you see stored behind me, to my assembly table, there's nothing obstructing me, and I don't have to walk around anything. I can just go directly down the center of my shop. Now I want to get into some of the other things that I've been asked a lot of questions about now that we've gotten the footprint out of the way. And this is going to be a long video because I'm super jazzed about this saw, and I've gotten a lot of questions, and I want to make sure that I cover all of that. And I've got some very strong opinions on this, to include some things that I don't like, which I will absolutely be covering here shortly. I got a lot of questions from people asking me, did your machine come like perfect, ready to go out of the box? Well, there is quite a bit of assembly that goes into this table saw, which I have an entire video, I referenced it earlier, where I actually showed how to assemble this. So if you're somebody that is thinking about getting one of these, or you buy one after watching this video, which I know some of you will, because it's awesome, but there's a video out there that shows you how to go through that. One thing I didn't show in the video was how to adjust the slider. So to answer that question, did it come perfect out of the box, or the crate, the answer is no. actually, I had to make a pretty significant adjustment to it. Now, I don't know if it was just something that happened in shipping, but basically the problem that I had is the height of the slider was substantially higher than it should have been at the front. At the blade, it was pretty close, and on the outfeed side, it was actually kind of perfect. So this was not an enjoyable process initially for me. I struggled to find a video that explained all this. There are some good things out there, but there was nothing that was as easy as the way that Felder ended up telling me to do it. So let me break this down fairly simple just so people understand, because this was a very big part of my frustration with this machine when I initially got it, was trying to dial this thing in. Basically, there's 6 posts. There's 2 posts here, one on the outside, one on the inside. There's 2 in the middle, and there's 2 back here. You have access to these 2 and these 2 from some access holes. The ones in the middle, the outside one you have access underneath the slider, the inside one, you basically have to slide this over, right? And you have to be able to access it from the inside. So it's time consuming. So there is a rolling carriage that sits underneath this slider. So let's put it in its roughly center location. Right now that carriage is basically directly over the top of the 2 center ones. If I push this all the way out, it's now practically right over the far posts. And then when I go all the way back, pretty obvious, right? Then it's going to be over the front posts. So what I was told was those posts will basically telegraph, I guess would be the right word, wherever it is through that chassis onto the sliding table. So what I was doing is I was making the adjustments back here, getting this really good, then I would go make the adjustments here, getting that good, figuring out the center, was like, okay, cool, I got it adjusted, and then I would slide the thing back and everything would change. Well, because I adjusted these without the cradle underneath it, or the cradle on top of it, the rolling carriage, and I did the same thing back here. So basically it was like you need to make the adjustments when the carriage is directly over the top. And to do that, I started here and made the adjustments, got it perfect, pushed it all the way down, made the adjustments, got that nice, brought it back to the middle, and this took a little while because I had to adjust it, slide it, adjust it, keep doing that over and over and over again. But the end result was it stayed true all the way across. So that was probably the most frustrating. I actually thought that I made a mistake getting this and putting this in my shop because I was chasing this for 2 days trying to get it perfect, and I could not figure out how to do it. And then I got on the phone with Felder, and they were like, here's what you need to try. This is why you need to do it this way. This is what is happening. And I'm like, that makes complete sense. And I came out the next day, and within a couple of hours, I had everything dialed in to my liking. I still do want to go back with some feeler gauges and just kind of really try to dial it in, especially now that I know exactly what the procedure is. But I'm very, very happy with that. Here, let's talk about something that I'm not totally happy with, and that has to do with the fence. So what kind of fence is this? It's an industrial fence. It is a high-low fence. It is an adjustable fence. Now, why would you want the fence to be adjustable like that? For those of you that don't know, let's say that I was ripping a piece and I was using the slider and pushing it through. Well, I only need the fence to be in the location before the blade, so I can move this back, lock it down, and then when I touch off, I know that my measurement is going to be whatever, I push it through, and what this allows is for the offcut to be on the side and not get pinched in between the fence and the blade. So it is a very nice feature to have, and it's a feature that I often use. Another common question that I've gotten is, can this be used like a traditional table saw? And the answer is yes. The fence moves just like any other fence, and it's operated. However, it is a little bit awkward to be on this side, right? of the blade just because you have this here. Now you can move this forward, but then it's not locked, and I have done that many times. Or you could also stand on this side and push your boards through. Now, one thing that I will highlight is that this can get in the way. So like I wouldn't try to cut off a thin strip using the fence by pushing it through this way, like you would a traditional table saw. Why? Because I can do the same thing with little to no effort using the sliding table, because that's what it's designed for. This saw is not designed to be used as a standard table saw. So that is really challenging, I think, when I first started using it, is that all I could think about was how to use a standard table saw, which that's not what this is. It is not designed to do that. Can you use it for that? Yes. But something that you have to think about, and why I had such a big issue with the slider, personally, why I had such an issue with it in the beginning, is because I was looking at it going, okay, well, when I'm ripping a board using the fence, that slider is way too high. It's causing the board to sit like this. Makes sense, because it is. So the result of that is when I push a cut through, it's not cutting at 90, because the board is canted like this. Now, if this was at the level that it needs to be at, that's not an issue or a concern, right? So I made those adjustments and did that. But then one day I was like, I probably shouldn't use the saw that way very often unless I needed to, because that's when I started to learn how to use the slider and the advantages of the slider, and that's when everything changed for me. But going back to what I don't love about the fence is how you adjust it to be parallel with the blade, or actually have a slight toe out. But how you go about doing that, it's very, very finicky. And again, it's another one of those things that could take a good amount of time. I still don't have it dialed in perfectly, mainly because I haven't taken the time to do it yet, because I don't really use the fence anymore to give me measurements on rip cuts. I try to use the outrigger table as much as I possibly can, because it's so incredibly accurate and it's so much easier to do than worrying about fussing with the fence and everything else. So right here, it's fine. It's absolutely fine. I've got a nice little toe out on that exterior portion of the blade. What happens though is that when I pull this back and I'm pushing a cut through and I'm using the fence, because that's what's great. I can take my board and I can slide it up against this fence. When I do that, because it's toed out, well, the toe in basically up here is amplified back here. So because I don't have this dialed in absolutely perfectly, it has been giving me a little bit of deviation when I do that. But again, it's so rare that I do that, I just haven't really taken the time to dial it in, which I need to do, because why not? So I'm typically not a person that, you know, chases absolute perfection in terms of accuracy when it comes to tools, because until there's a problem, I don't consider it a problem. So if I make a cut and it's square and I'm not seeing something that's way out of square, or I'm not having issues assembling anything, I'm like, okay, it's good. Let's keep it that way. I'm not gonna like get out my feeler gauges and like dial everything in and be within a 1,000th of an inch on every little area. I just don't care, right? But with this machine, it's different, because this has so many moving parts, and I now see what the value in the machine is. I wanna make sure that I am getting everything I can out of this machine. I'll bring you in close so you can see the bolts that I'm talking about and how you go about adjusting the fence. So the fence itself rides on this metal bar. You get a much better visual of it now. But the way that you make adjustments to this is through this post and this post here. And when I say it's finicky, it's because there's a bolt here, there's a bolt on the back here, and there's a bolt here. So you're talking such minute adjustments that you need to make. Anybody that's ever adjusted 2 bolts at the same time, tightening down, loosening one, trying to get it right, it always shifts. So it can make it to where you're chasing that, especially if you're somebody that uses a dial indicator to like get everything perfect. This could be a little bit frustrating, but with a little bit of work and a little bit of patience, I think it is possible. But because of my experience that I had, I just haven't really chased it yet, because I'm still getting the results that I'm happy with. overall based on the way that I use the saw. Now, since I have you at this angle already, we'll cover a couple of other things. A common question is people want to know what way the blade tilts. The blade does tilt to the right, as you can see here. I move the blade like this, and the blade tilts over to the right. And it's just adjusted up and down with this handle, and it's adjusted left or right with the handle over here on the right-hand side. Now, this only comes from the factory with one handle because it is removable. You can just take it and put it over here. However, I had an extra one from my joiner planer combo, so I just leave them on. But a question that I've gotten when I've told people that it tilts to the right is they're like, why does it tilt to the right and not the left? Well, it's because of the slider. So if you're going to be making those cuts, traditionally you're going to be doing it on the slider, and we want the blade to go away from the slider. So now, another thing that I really don't love is the location of the power button. This is the power button to turn it on. This is the off button. I just look at that and I go, it's basically, I have to reach across in order to turn the machine on. Now I'm directly in line with the blade, which is not necessarily a problem when you're turning the machine on, but some people may have a concern with it when they're turning the machine off. Felder did think of that with this machine, and I'll talk about that in a second. But one thing I wanted to highlight is that you see this cutout right here. You can actually get an additional power switch and run that power switch off of the existing one and put it right here if you want to. Now, if we come over here, you're going to see an emergency off button. So this is, I didn't think of this initially. I was like, man, I got to keep reaching over and turn the machine off. And then on one of my conversations with Felder, they were like, have you tried using the emergency off switch? Because that's what it's there for. And I'm like, no, I haven't, but I will now. So it's really great because it's right here next to my leg. As I push stuff through and I can take my material, I can just use my knee, bump it off. I can just push it. Machine shuts off, and then the next time I want to use it, I just use the standard power button. Since we're here, I'll go ahead and show you. This is the handle I was talking about to adjust the bevel angle. This right here is the lock to lock the slider in its position, which is right there. So it is now locked. I can lock that out so it freely moves back and forth. Next, I'm going to talk about stuff that has to do with the blade, but I wanted to share something that I ran into when I got the machine. I thought the machine was fried because it wouldn't start. This little knob right here, it has 3 positions. So this is all the way down. This unlocks the access cover and actually kills the power to the machine. This is how you actually access the compartment that stores the blades, which I'll talk about the blades here in a minute. But when this is in the up position by 1, everything's good, it's activated, it's locked. When you come up here to this one, it also kills the power, and I didn't know that. So when I installed this, I had this all the way up, and when I tried to turn on the machine, it wouldn't start, and I'm like, oh no, what did I do? Again, Felder was a huge help, and they were like, check the switch on the back and make sure it's in the center location. Sure enough, thing fired right up. So we slide that down, and then we can slide this all the way back, and we have perfect visibility and access to the blade and the internal portion of the saw. The most common question I've got in relation to the blade is, can this come equipped with a scoring blade? The answer is yes. I still don't have a scoring blade. I'm waiting on it. But the scoring blade would go right here, and the adjustments would be made through these holes to get everything dialed in. So I'm not going to cover that in this video, but yes, you absolutely can have that on this, which is a huge benefit to a sliding table saw. The next thing everybody always wants to know is, how big of a blade can you get? So I actually can get way more cut capacity on this saw than my previous one because I can put a 12-inch blade on that. This is a standard 10-inch style blade. This is a Felder blade. It's the Silent Power classic blade. It's been performing absolutely fantastic. This saw does not take all standard blades. Why? Because it is a 30mm arbor 2-pin design, meaning there are 2 pins that go through the blade, which I will show you here in just a moment. The reason for the 2 pins is because these blades are required to stop way faster, and I will show you that in this video, than traditional table saw blades. So the pins allow that to happen because it is stopping so quickly. And I'll show you all that here in a moment. Next thing, is this is the splitter riving knife. I don't like this one. I will just be very open and honest about it. This one is meant for if you're going to use the overarm. Blade guard, I do not use that. I don't ever intend on using it, so I will be replacing this with the riving knife that they offer, which will not give me the ability to do the over blade guard. There's this nut here, and then there's this hex bolt that goes in there. So I'm going to try to do this at this angle, which I don't have tons of space, but I think we'll be okay. Loosen that. This comes out. My arbor nut comes off, or arbor cap, I should say. And this is where you can really see the actual arbor size and the 2-pin system. So as you can see right there, it's got the 2 pins. So, common question, can you do a dado stack? Yes, they actually make a dado stack that works perfectly with this, that goes up to 3/4 of an inch, roughly, for an imperial equivalent, but that can work. I've been told that Forest does make one that works for this because it does have the pin locking system, but essentially what I'm trying to say is that if you can find a blade company, which there are blades, I know Tenru makes blades, I know that Ridge Carbide makes blades for this saw, but 30mm arbor, 2-pin design. Anything with that will work on this saw. Since we're talking about the blade still, I do want to show you very quickly just how fast the blade stops. Done. It's pretty impressive. Why does the blade stop so quickly? It's my understanding it's just an EU regulation that the blade stops within a certain amount of time. I don't know what the exact regulation is, but it has to do with safety, and it's probably the same reason why they're not using dado stacks over there. But because of that, it happens here as well. Now I can just take an opportunity to answer some of the more basic questions that I've gotten. The first one being is, does it come with a zero clearance insert? Does it come with one on it? No, and I would really, really recommend doing it because this saw does have a tendency, if you're cutting thin materials or little slivers on the slider, very often it will grab the wood and shoot it back down in, which is not a safety concern, and I've never had any problems with it. But I just feel like it happens more here, and the solution to that is a zero clearance. So I'm telling you that to say this. It does not come with one on the machine. It just comes with a like a hard plastic, pretty decent size spacing there. It does come with one that is meant for the dado stack, which I still don't have the dado stack yet, so I can't show anything in this video, but I do intend on getting it. You could utilize this and then have a zero clearance. The other option is Ramon Valdez. Actually, he has a lot of great videos on a K3. So does David Bedrosian, who makes the Fritz and Franz jig, which we'll save that for another video. But there's all kinds of great things that you can use on a slider. He makes out of Baltic birch that has like a black laminate material over the top of it. He makes zero clearance inserts that you can use. I just still haven't installed it yet, but I plan on doing that here very soon. Another question that I get pretty often is, why isn't there a miter slot on the table saw? There isn't one on the saw. I can't think of an instance why you would need one, seeing as how you have a sliding table here. But there is one on here. Now, it's not a standard size like your traditional miter slots. However, I have found that different clamps that I have in the shop have worked in it. A good example of that would be one of the Festool ratcheting clamps. It's not perfect, but when you tighten it down, it works very, very well. But there's a better solution, and that is this, which these are these little metal blocks. Again, Ramon Valdez carries these and sells them. I'll leave a link to his page down below, as well as David Bedrosian, if you guys want to see some of the different things that are offered aftermarket for this. But this block just sits in the channel perfectly, and then you can get yourself one of these Craig clamps, and now I have a clamp on my slider, and this has been a lifesaver. It makes using this so great. And here in a moment, I'm going to start preaching on why I think this is such a fun and great machine to have. But this clamp makes a huge difference. Next question I've gotten a lot, and I got this a lot on my A341, and it has to do with power. People freak out and they think that they need a 30 amp breaker or even larger for these machines. That's not the case in the United States. These machines are rated 208 to 240, single phase, 20 amp circuit. That's what you need for this machine. It is a 4 horsepower motor, but it runs off a 20 amp breaker. And to prove it, I have it plugged in right here. Now I do have it on an extension cord, but I have a 20 amp circuit. It is not any bigger. You do not need a 30 amp. The same thing applies with the A341. So don't think that you need to go get some crazy special power in order to run one of these machines here in the United States. Very different story if you're in Europe, which I don't need to be explaining to you guys in Europe your power stuff because I don't know it. And finally, the last question that I got a lot has to do with what dust collection port size does it have. It's 120 millimeters, so roughly 5 inches. They do sell a reducer, and I run a reducer on all 3 of my tools from Hammer, the bandsaw, the joiner planer combo, and this machine. Maybe at some point I would like to run 5-inch pipe, but I invested my money in 6-inch down to 4-inch, so it just didn't make a lot of sense monetarily for me to switch over just to see. But after I use this for a little while, I think it might be a good idea to make that investment and see if there is a significant difference in what I'm getting. And talking about dust collection, the saw does a really, really good job. I have the Harvey Gyro Air G700 dust collector. This is my longest run. It is a 4-inch. And the dust collection is really effective. I can make a lot of cuts. It's not perfect. If I could get a 1,000 plus CFM unit, 1,200 plus CFM unit, which is what I believe Felder would recommend for a machine like this, then obviously it would be a lot better. And I would be interested to see how much better it is. But there's so many factors that go into dust collection. How high the blade is, what blade you're using, what material you're cutting, what type of cut it is, how thick the cut is, how wide the cut is. There's just so many things that have a variance. But I say all of that to basically say this, is when I'm cutting down a bunch of pieces of Baltic birch for cabinets or whatever the case is, because I've used this saw on like 3 or 4 different projects so far where I had to use it very heavily, the amount of dust that's left in front of the saw is pretty insignificant. I wouldn't say it's any worse or any better than when I had my saw stop. I mean, that's probably the easiest way to do it. I don't have crazy high expectations for dust collection, though, with the equipment that I have in my shop. All right, getting into the last few things that I want to highlight on here. There's a lot of different ways that you can utilize the slider. The first is by this miter gauge that you can get that basically slides into this slot. I'm not going to put it in just because I have the clamp and everything here, but slides into this slot. It has a positive stop right here. There are some videos out there talking about some design flaws with this stop. I've set mine up. I've took the time to get this thing dialed in to be perfectly 90. I haven't noticed any problems with it, but the reason I haven't noticed any problems with it is because I don't ever use this, because I don't feel like I need to. I'm not somebody that feels the need to be back here pushing everything through with the fence behind. I'm going to show you the way that I love to use this saw. But this is an option. So I could have a miter gauge back here. I think this would be really beneficial if you had the very short slider. I think if you had that, because then it's like I have a crosscut sled basically built in and I'm always standing off to the side, which is another thing I want to talk about. So now I want to show you the way that I use the saw all the time. I felt no need to make any changes. This is the way that I absolutely love using the saw, and that's pushing into a fence. This can be mounted here, but I would lose some capacity, so I don't do that. I took the time to dial this thing in. This can give me any angled cut up to 45 degrees with all these preset holes here. I can simply pivot and turn this and lock it right into place. It's fantastic. It's got these 2 wonderful stops on it, absolutely no deflection. They actually fit into the fence itself. This thing is dialed in absolutely perfectly. I went through the William Ing 5-cut method for, I don't know, probably 2 hours one day, just getting this thing dialed in perfectly. I've got my stop set here. I make cuts. I know if I'm cutting something on this, it is dead on accurate every single time. So because of that, this is just one of those examples of why I spent the time getting this thing dialed in and why I don't steer away from this if I don't have to. Because I know with 100% certainty what I'm doing is going to be exactly what I want. And it's absolutely fantastic. Now, I did get a lot of people that asked me, well, why didn't you just get the sliding table attachment for your saw stop? Here's my opinion. It's laughable, the comparison between that and an actual traditional slider. It is just not comparable. I look at a sliding table attachment for a standard table saw as building in a crosscut sled, and that's where it stops. You'll get a lot of the same functionality out of it, but it is not the same. It is not something beefy like this. I feel like the accuracy of one of these is probably a lot more reliable, and this is not just specific to Felder or the hammer line, just a machine like this. It's not a comparison. It just isn't. The other thing too is that if you're going to think about doing that, now you're taking up a huge, huge footprint. I will tell you that a 36-inch or even the 52, or the 52, even the 36, with that sliding table attachment and a saw stop, or Harvey makes a table saw, it is bigger than this footprint right here. So again, I just think it's one of those things that because you can't go to a store and visually see these things, it's hard to think of that in your head, how much space it really takes. And finally, the question that everybody has asked, why would you get rid of a saw stop with the safety feature for a slider? Well, here's what I'm going to tell you. I do not regret leaving my saw stop. I never tripped the brake on my saw stop, ever, not once. I do not regret it at all. Matter of fact, I will never, ever go back to a traditional table saw unless I had the space for another saw that I could have a dedicated dado stack, or it became a space issue and I needed to downsize and have something more compact that I can move around a little bit more. And speaking of moving around, they do offer a mobility kit for this, but because it has an enclosed base, you can actually use a lot of the off-the-shelf ones that are adjustable. I don't have one on here. I don't plan on moving this, but I don't regret it at all. And then I always get like, oh, but the saw stop is so much safer. A table saw is as safe as you make it. I will agree that, yes, the added benefit to the saw stop is the technology. A lot of people want to know if this has the saw stop technology because they've seen the Kappa series that has it, and the blade retracts down, and the Altendorf saws and all that stuff. The answer is no. This line of saws, this is an entry-level line from Felder. And when I say entry-level from Felder, the hammer line is their entry-level, but there's nothing entry-level about it in terms of quality. But you're not going to get that here. Here's what I'm going to tell you, though. I feel way more safe using this saw than I ever did on my saw stop. There's only one scenario on this table saw that I have felt uncomfortable, and it was in the beginning when I was trying to rip boards the way that you would do on a regular table saw and trying to figure out where to stand and how to do all of that. And then I had this crazy realization. I'm like, why am I not just using this fence and pushing stuff through? Like, it's unbelievable how this has changed how I process materials. Like, I can stand over here away from the blade at all times, or let's say 95% of the time. I can stand right over here. I'm away from the blade. I'm to the left side. I'm holding my material. I'm sliding a table through. I'm getting perfect results with little to no effort, right? Like, if I can put this thing back here and I can take a 5x5 sheet of Baltic birch, set it up on this table, and I can lock this down, and I can go like this and push my cut through and then pull it back, and take my offcut piece and do this other stuff, I can get these perfect results without having to sit here and like try to hold something the right way and like push it through. It is just absolutely remarkable. I will never, ever want to go back from having this. This has like completely opened my eyes. It has completely changed the way that I work. And I'll even go one further with that. I don't think I've said it enough in this video. I absolutely love this saw. However, now that I've learned how, and please don't mistake this next comment as like I'm a expert and I know everything. I don't. I'm learning how to use this machine and how to truly get the most out of it, literally every single time that I use it. But knowing what I know now and the things that I wish were a little bit different, or the things that I think would be such a great addition, those are all the things that you can get when you upgrade from this to a felder. So this year, even though I will only have this for about a year, I fully intend on getting the felder version of this and putting that in the shop. And I'm so interested to see how big of a difference the little subtle things that I know now after using this that I would love to have, or I can see would be a great convenience feature. I can't say enough good things. I told you the things that I don't like. This is not a perfect machine, right? There are things that I absolutely think could be better, and there are things that I think should be changed. But again, I mean, this is their entry-level line, right? If you want those things different, well, then you step up, which saw you get. So that's kind of the situation that I find myself in, and I'm just, obsessed with tools. So I like to try and experiment with different things. So that's all I got for this video. I hope you guys love it. I hope you guys are very clear on my position on a sliding table saw and how it will always have a place in my shop. I'll see you later.